Hello, welcome to the 27th webinar in our Connected Learning series. I'm Howard Reingold. To date, our webinar content has been viewed in more than 90 countries. We've got a group notes Google Doc for today. The URL for that should be included in the live stream chat. We welcome your assistance in capturing highlights and sharing resources related to today's topic. It helps make a richer resource for people who are using these webinars, and it's also a good activity for our community formation. Our guest today is James Bosco. I'll tell you about him in a second. Please visit his webinar page at www.connectedlearning.tv later today for a full recording of the webinar, a list of the questions asked, a list of the resources mentioned, and an archive of the live stream chat. We welcome you to continue today's conversation if you wish on that page through the comment thread, as well as through the Twitter hashtag Connected Learning. We also wanted to let you know that the Connected Learning Research Network has launched a survey study competition to show how youth are learning in connected learning environments. They are looking for 30 to 40 groups to participate. The link for more info should be in the live stream chat. So, James Bosco is Professor Emeritus at Western Michigan University and is the Principal Investigator for the Consortium for School Networking project funded by the MacArthur Foundation titled School Transformation with Digital Media and Learning, Leveraging a Leading-Edge Cadre of School District Leaders for Reimagining Learning. Over the past 20 years, he has been actively engaged in policy formation and development projects pertaining to educational and school reform. And we've got a group of interesting respondents here. Why don't you introduce yourselves, starting with Danielle?
Sure. I'm Danielle Harrow, or Danny Harrow, and I was the former Instructional Technology Administrator in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, in the southeastern part of the state. And I was a classroom teacher, technology integration specialist for a number of years. And this past year, I took a job as an assistant professor of digital media and learning at Clemson University. So I've just begun that. So nice to talk with everybody today.
Hi, and I'm Greg McVary. I'm an assistant professor at Southern Connecticut State University, and my work is actually in more formal learning spaces, so I'm very excited whenever I get the chance.
Froze.
I guess he froze a little bit. Why don't we just continue with James? You're still muted.
Can you guys hear me now?
Now we can. Go ahead and continue, Greg.
Hi, I don't know how much I'm repeating, but my name is Greg McVary. I'm an assistant professor at Southern Connecticut State University, and my work is more in digital learning in more formal spaces. That's why I'm always excited to interact with such wonderful scholars who work in
Boy, just at the same time. I'm not sure what's going on there. It's probably a bandwidth issue.
Yeah. Let me try to plug in while you guys just go ahead and move forward.
Okay, James, why don't you get started?
Yeah. Okay, I'm happy to do so. Yeah, thanks, Howard. It's really a great pleasure to participate in one of these online hangouts for connected learning. Let me just bring this up and go to. Yeah, my title comes with apologies to Ivan Illich. As most of you know, Illich was a radical left thinker who argued that social institutions undermined human values. Schools were one of his targets in his 1971 book, Deschooling Society. He felt students are schooled to confuse teaching with learning, grade achievement with education, a diploma with competence, and fluency with the ability to say something new. And those are his words. For Illich, schools were a repressive rather than a liberating agency. I chose to start with Illich because I think doing so sets our focus on the nature and role of schools in society. My point is that if we consider the impact of digital media on what schools do, then indeed the impact has generally not been great. If, however, we consider the impact of digital media on what schools are, the impact is profound. The world as it exists around schools has created a new context, and that context implies the need for adaptation if schools are to do the best they can for our kids. In this sense, society has been reschooled. This seems to be recognized in some schools, but far from the majority of them. Even when it is recognized by school personnel, the ideological and structural factors, both internal and external to the school organization, inhibit the needed adaptation. Let me try in a few minutes to explain. The history of American education falls into three eras. The first, of course, begins with the migration of the English to New England in 1620 and continued into the mid-19th century. The first school in America was established by Philemon Proudmon in 1635 in Boston, and you're looking at a picture of his school, which eventually turned into the Boston Latin School, which of course is still there. But during that first year, children acquired.
We're not seeing that picture yet. We're still seeing Ivan Illich, so you need to switch slides.
Really? Okay. Not sure. Well, let me go back and show. Now, are you seeing it?
Now we're seeing the school.
Okay. For some reason, let me put it on slides. Are you seeing it now? The school?
Yes.
Okay, you're seeing the school.
Yes.
Good. Okay. I don't know what happened. I was on my screen, but not yours. Anyway, that's Philemon. That's his school. That's Proudmon's school in Boston. During that first era, children acquired their education, in Larry Kremen's words, anywhere and everywhere. Not only in schoolrooms, but in kitchens, manses, churches, meeting houses, sheds erected in fields, and shops erected in town.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Children were taught by parents, tutors, clergymen, lay readers, preceptors, physicians, lawyers, artisans, and shopkeepers. Things changed, and they changed pretty dramatically in the middle of the 19th century with leadership from a number of public figures. But by the way, how are you now seeing the next screen, the pictures? You are seeing the next screen?
Not yet.
Okay, let me go back. Let me end it. Okay. It's not as nice, but we'll do it that way. Let's see.
Go back one.
Yeah, back to this. There we are. Now you see, right?
Now we see Horace Mann and Henry Barnard.
That's what you should be seeing. Okay. I don't know why it's not working full screen. It was earlier, but who knows? The ghosts of bad technology. Anyway, things did change in the mid-19th century particularly as a result of these two men, but also a cadre of others in their states and elsewhere. Along with a cadre of like-minded people in their states and elsewhere, they created the American public school system. This was in response to social conditions in America. In particular, the dramatic increase in immigration, urbanization, and industrialization. The two institutions that had played a key role in education in the first era, the family and the church, were seen to have defaulted in their responsibility, especially in cities. I often hear that the American public schools were based on a factory model, but this is a misreading of history. The founders were systems thinkers, and hopefully the screen has changed. And you see some quotes lifted from some of their writing, and
Yes.
system fully developed. I'm not sure how well you can read it on your screen since it's not full screen, but what toil is arriving at a true system, infusing that system into the minds of others, to give efficiency to the administration of the school system. And they were not using the word system lightly. They meant system in the honest to goodness way in which we use that term. They were very much were committed to the notion of a system. And if they were using a metaphor of, if there was a metaphor underlying that, it was not the metaphor of the factory. It was actually the metaphor of the machine, which was because we were in the machine age, and machines, in the way in which the components were able to come together to work toward the achievement of a goal, of a process, of a task, was something that was very appealing to them. So they were quite explicit in developing the American public school system with underscore the word system. The way in which they were approaching this certainly put schools in as the primary, you could almost say exclusive, really. It's primary to exclusive agency for education. I'll read this because I'm not sure of how visible it is on your screen. The children must be given up implicitly to the discipline of the school. Nothing can be done unless the teacher has the entire control of the pupils in school hours and out of school too, so far as the rules of the school are concerned. If the parent in any way interferes with or overrules the arrangements of the teacher, he may attribute it to himself if the school is not successful. That's from Calvin Stowe, who was another of the great educational reformers of his day. Well, I believe we're now in the third era of American education, and it is my belief, and I don't think that I need to argue too strenuously about the way in which digital media has affected all sectors of our life, and certainly has affected the world of learning, the world of human culture outside of schools. It's interesting to note that in speaking about what would replace schools in deschooling society, Illich spoke of something that closely resembled the World Wide Web. He called them learning webs, and this was about 3 decades before the invention of the World Wide Web. The key point in terms of where we are. I've used the words education, school, learner, and pupil in what I've said so far, but I'm not using those words interchangeably. Let me say what I mean by those words. Education and school are typically used to refer to the same entity. We name schools when asked where we got our education. Educational policy is generally school policy. I differentiate these terms and use the term education to refer to the totality of processes and agencies that enable the person to have human functionality. This involves all the relevant processes and agencies, school being one of them, albeit an important one. As a corollary, learner is the person who is acquiring an education anywhere and everywhere. Pupil or student is a role within the school social system of the school. Education, in the way I'm using it, has never been confined to only what happens in school. But the access to out-of-school learning resources via digital media at this moment represents a quantum leap in educational opportunity and access. A useful parallel to the issue we face in schools in light of the cultural changes brought on by digital media is the newspaper industry. An article in the American Journalism Review by Rachel Smolkin describes the plight of newspaper people in coming to grips with the way digital media had changed the how, what, where, and when people are now getting the content that was once the domain of newspapers. The response of the people in the newspaper business, certainly as this began to, as they began to recognize it, their response was to put some new wine in the old bottle. This didn't work. The challenge was to contend with the world as it is, rather than how it used to be or how we might like it to be. Her article is titled Adapt or Die. We face a parallel problem with the public school. If we adhere to the 19th and 20th century ideology of what schools are, their nature and role in society, and maintain the key structures of the school that the school put in place, and these are the key structures, I believe. These were the elements that were, if you think again about the metaphor of the machine, these were the parts of that machine which were the key parts of that machine which were put in place to create the outcome and the process, accomplish the task that the founders envisioned. So if we maintain those key structures put in place by the founders, then we won't be able to provide the best we can for our kids. The task is to approach the adaptation of schools from an education and learner perspective. And I mean that not just as a semantic change, which I think generally it is when this is spoken. It's just a little change in the word, but I don't think there's a whole lot of change in the meaning. So the task is to approach the adaptation of schools from an education and learner perspective, not just as a semantic change, but as a fundamental conceptual change. This means that school policy and practice pertaining to in-school and out-of-school learning is holistic rather than bifurcated. Out-of-school learning is recognized as important even when it is not teacher or school initiated. The teacher is an educator in the sense I've defined it, and plays a valuable role in the child's education, not just in their schooling. This represents a dramatic shift in what schools do that is consistent, I believe, I'll argue, with the world we are in today rather than the world where we were in yesterday. Ironically, the third era of American education looks a lot like the first era. Much of the conversation about redesign, reform, reimagining, and all the other re's start from inside the school and work out. I believe we have to start outside the school and work in. We need to take a clear-eyed look at the way the world is and not see the task as simply allowing some digital media to enter the classroom door. Rather, we need to tune the structure to a conception of the school that is quite different from the conceptions of those who created the American public school system. Perhaps with schools, it is not adapt or die, but it well might be adapt or languish. My email address is here, and certainly anyone online who chooses to contact me, happy to talk further and certainly talk on the connected learning site, connected learner site. But I'm looking forward now to some good conversation.
All right, who wants to jump in on that?
I'm actually going to wait just a minute because, believe it or not.
Do you have the live stream channel on?
No, yeah, believe it or not, they're testing the emergency system here. I sent the text that it'll be over shortly, so I'm going to listen for a few minutes, and then I hope to jump in about 5 minutes. My apologies.
Okay. Greg? You're muted, Greg.
John, you talked about how, the founders of public education had a systems approach versus, our false metaphor of the industrial approach. Can we still apply systems theory today, or is that model of schooling just completely, because of digital media, does that a systems theory no longer apply to how we think about schools?
Well, I think we can, but I think it's a different kind of systems thinking, and I think it is more, as some people have talked about it, in organic systems framework, not in the more mechanistic systems approach. And it was, I mean, certainly the founders were certainly thinking more mechanistically about the various parts. But if we think about it, I mean, there's certainly there's certainly value in understanding the totality by recognizing that we do exist within within a within systems. I mean, the within a social system, within a cultural system, and so I think that is I think we can still use it, but as I said, more along what people are talking about in that organic, which is much more synergistic and much less mechanistic.
Yeah. And then my follow-up question is, when we look at and we study kids in digital spaces and out of school or informal learning environments, as you call them in your review, I always think back to kind of like the problem solvers just constantly harping back onto, Grandmasters in chess. There's so very few Grandmasters, and I think it's kind of, there's so very few students that are actual true experts in digital media spaces. Do we have something to learn by looking at just the experts in digital media spaces? Or, I mean, I just don't consider most kids to be more than novices when it comes to actually creating content.
Right. Well, I wasn't thinking of it so much about their expertise as in the use of digital media, as much as their ability to be involved in learning experiences. And by the way, digital media is only one of them. I mean, that's only one aspect. But in terms of what is happening to them and with them and for them in their world. I mean, the notion, it's a simple notion that the human being is, and I think everybody kind of buys into this, the human being is a learning organism, which is not just confined to a particular space and a particular time. So the issue is, how do we take advantage of that? And it's one thing for the teacher to say, well, if a kid is doing something or has an interest or is involved with something out of school that relates to our curriculum, then it's relevant. But if it is not, then it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. I mean, it's okay. It's harmless. They can do it, but it's not something which I, as a teacher, have responsibility to deal with, because I am a school teacher and they are my pupils, and that sets the boundary. I'm saying we need to burst through that boundary. Does that mean that right now we have 90% of kids who are going out and becoming part of writing groups online, and who are looking into all sorts of, and nurturing their interests in all sorts of fields outside, on the web? I don't think it does. But it's saying that is the world we're in, and we should be cultivating that and exploiting that as much as we are trying to advance their understanding of the core curriculum.
Well, of course, that's what we're trying to do with connected learning, but I see a disparity between, it's not just the technical expertise. I think that's actually relatively easy. It's the way of doing things that digital media affords. So students are used to performing mostly for the teacher. They write papers, none of the other students see the papers, and they get a grade from the teacher. Students are used to doing their work alone and not writing a collaborative document. That's considered cheating. Students are used to quietly listening while the teacher broadcasts to them. They're not used to peer learning. All of these are things, at this moment, there are young people teaching and learning on YouTube and in all kinds of other forums who know how to use these media, but more importantly, they're so interested in learning how to make an anime music video, or build a snowboard, or whatever it is they're learning, that they will learn the media. I think learning how to use the tools is trivial if they are given permission, and there's just a collision between the expectations of school and students and pupils, and the way a lot of young people live their lives as learners. I don't think even think of themselves as learners, but they are.
Yeah, and I very much agree with what you said, and I think that the challenge, and this is incredible. I'm you know, I don't just I'm not I'm not a professor who stands on the sidelines writing paper about what other people are doing wrong. I've been involved very directly with these things, working with schools and working in projects in schools. So I have a deep appreciation of the difficulty of turning things around. But I have come to the conclusion that if we try to work within the same structure and try, I think we may have pushed it as far as it can go. I think we may have gotten as much juice out of it as we possibly can get. And I think that one of the constraining factors is the nativist, or maybe not so nativist, maybe something that's been cultivated over the years, in terms of what we think about what the school's job is to be in society, and what citizens and parents and school boards, and especially politicians, their conception of the school, I think, is sets boundaries, and creative teachers, good teachers, and we've got them, and administrators can push at those boundaries, but I am not going to bet that they're going to be. I'm not going to bet that they will simply melt away unless we deal with some of these things explicitly and directly, and that's tough because everything is flying in the other direction. If you listen to what politicians are saying in terms of their conception of the school, I mean, they're back. They could be talking to Horace Mann, and they'd be right in this. They could have a cup of coffee with Horace Mann, and they'd be right there. So and it's that's becomes part of the challenge. And by the way, citizens also. If you look at the Gallup reports on citizens' support of the schools, citizens are not calling for massive change in the schools. They're generally pretty happy with the way things are. Generally, the best we can get from seeing what the Gallup poll and others are saying about schools, that yeah, we can improve them, but we can improve them by doing better what we're already doing.
Yet I think we hear quite a bit, at least in K-12, we heard quite a bit about the sort of skills that students would need to function as, the big talk had been obviously global citizenship, ethical, responsible computing, your persona online. I mean, we've had a lot of discussion in K-12, and I'm not just talking in southeastern Wisconsin, across the country at conferences, and talked quite a bit about how we adequately prepare kids, and we've felt that the push is coming from not so much from higher ed, but from the job force. So careers are going to demand this different sort of skill. There's been a lot of talk about 21st century skills and really digging into what it means. And so it's interesting that politicians are calling for more of the same, maybe more standards, increased testing, MAPS testing, but our job to actually adequately prepare students doesn't lie within more of the same. So, I mean, that part is interesting to me, and I think social media has offered teachers to, I mean, Twitter has been kind of overtaken in some ways by interested K-12 teachers who form these networks about best practices and things that they can share. And I think that in some ways, beyond the fact that K-12 is working with minors and has FERPA and SEPA and all of those things that they need to protect, K-12 seems to be able to reinvent themselves in some ways, or have the potential to do that faster And it may be because the students are sitting right in front of them and teachers are recognizing that to motivate them to be relevant, they need to really think about how they connect with kids and what it is kids want to do. So, I mean, I've just witnessed in the last 2 years a huge increase in the number of teachers very interested in what digital media can offer and thinking about the tool as an artifact to construct meaning and no longer, here's the software you use, it's very standard, download it, let's do a training and let's walk our kids through these training steps. And I certainly don't speak for all teachers in all schools, but I've definitely noticed a huge increase in awareness. And even Google Apps, the idea that there are states that have actually adopted Google Apps for education, which speaks volumes about what states' departments of education think about collaborative tools and spaces and being in those spaces with kids.
You know, as I listen to what's being said in all sorts of places, one of the things I hear very, very infrequently said among people who make, particularly among people making policy, both politicians and others in key roles, is anything about the dispositional, affective aspect of all these things. We're concerned, I mean, we are concerned about how our kids score on the achievement test and how they compare with Finland and China, certainly, and we're concerned about all those metrics, which are fine, okay, be concerned about it. But my sense is that the real essence of the problems, and this is hardly unique to me. I mean, everybody on this hangout has said this, I'm sure, but I don't know that we're getting it across as well as we need to. That the key aspect is dispositional, and so that what I'm concerned about, I'm not concerned about kids using digital media per se. I'm concerned about kids having interests, having something they care about, being turned on by something. Probably one of the most distressing things that's happened to me over the past few years is I talk with kids in schools, and you sit and you talk with them, and I'm even kids who are, you know, at the top of the you know, our high school kids that are going on to college and going to Harvard and Yale and Tulane and all the other great institutions in the United States, that when you ask them, and they're getting A's, okay, what are you studying right now that really is something, which class you really love, you can't wait to go to, you really care about? So oftentimes I get kind of is this guy for real? You know, they know how to do it. They know how to do it. They know how to achieve. But it is a very, very it's kind of it strikes me as being a sadly empty kind of achievement. So the issue is how do we do that? And you know, I use digital media all the time, but I don't care. I mean, why do I do it? Because the things I'm working on, the things I'm trying to learn, I can't do it any other way. I mean, it's inevitable for me because I have to use those resources in order to nurture my own interests and learning needs. I think that's what we need to do, and I don't think we're doing that. And when we started with all this stuff, our technology directors and people, I mean, the idea was, how do we get kids to use technology? How do we get it? And if we integrated technology, if we got it into the curriculum, we could pat ourselves on the back because now look at this, they're using computers, you know, and they were still using computers to do the same old stuff and basically in the same old way. And it concerns me that I would think that after 30 years we'd have somewhat migrated past that, but I still hear more of the echoes of that conversation than I wish I was hearing.
Yeah, and I have to second what you're saying about the dispositional work. I think all these efforts, the P21 or anybody, just trying to come up with a taxonomy of skills, it's just impossible. And not just, I think, in, like you're saying, let the kids have that kind of reflective thinking, whether it's in the computer or learning how to build their own surfboard or snowboard. And I don't think that we're really capturing that, but I think that's the kind of curricular, when we're talking about what kind of decisions, curricular decisions the teachers need to make, we can't just make it on what skills I'm going to teach, but we have to focus in on whatever you want to call them, habits, mind, dispositions, whatever. But to me, that is, especially I think in digital spaces, that there are new kinds of social practices and dispositions that favor students, and we have to come up with curriculum that really, the whole goal is to just build those kinds of learners. I would say, versus just teaching some kind of discrete skill that is just going to be different tomorrow. I think, as Howard said, the tool is menial. It's not important.
So we're knocking our head against the wall oftentimes in our classrooms to try to do, and there are a lot of teachers. I mean, obviously, it's not just the four of us who would support that. There are a lot of teachers who are in the classroom right now as we're speaking, who are trying to get kids turned on, involved, engaged, whatever, who oftentimes are knocking their head against the wall. And then those same kids go home, and some of those same kids, not all, but some of those same kids go home, and now they're really into what they're doing. So you're saying, why do we, what we have to do is make those walls of the school building incredibly more permeable than they ever were before, and that's why I was saying is starting outside looking in, and I'm not sure I don't know that I'm expressing it well enough what I'm trying to say, but I think it really boils down to that key issue in what we think schools are. I mean, fundamentally, the hegemony of schools in education is now waning. Should schools try to recapture that, or should they embrace it and say, this is wonderful, we're really concerned about kids being able to learn, this is great, this is great, because that's our goal, that kids are learners, and how can we play a part in that? Rather than saying, no, it's irrelevant because it doesn't pertain to what the state says is the core curriculum.
So I've got a question from the live stream, which is directed to all of us, which is, what are the practices that we do in the classroom that we think are going to help bring about this change that we're talking about? So Danielle, Greg, you want to jump in on that? Yeah. Or James?
I can talk about some of the practices that I think were very effective that change practice and change learning for our students. And all of the practices were really very much focused on content first and a look at the tool. So whether or not the tool made sense, whether it should be no tech, low tech, high tech, that sort of thing. But again, a lot of it was project-based learning, scaffolds, criteria, expectations. We still have standards to meet, but really taking a look at how we can offer some choice with students within whatever it might be. So it might be starting with a critical question, all things that we've known for years, but different ways to actually produce or create content around answering that question. So I think of an 8th grade course that our students take where they have 7 or 8 different issues that they're taking a look at, doing some research on, deciding if the sites are credible, what they may use some offline sites as well, and constructing or creating a blog about that particular issue. There's criteria about what it is they're supposed to pinpoint and target, but nothing saying this is how you should think or regurgitating facts on the blog, and then showing it in different ways. So text is important, but there's also multimodal methods of getting your point across. The conversation, because they're group administering a blog, might be in a Google Doc where they can really connect with one another, and the teacher can kind of scaffold and see what's going on while they're constructing their arguments. And then it's shared widely with other people. Some of the groups made a podcast about it and shared their podcast. Those sort of things were really motivating for kids. Hit the social studies, English language arts content. There was a lot going on in the classroom. The kids were pretty engaged, and we had pretty large numbers of kids working through this. The difficult part was not at all transferring skills. So most of the kids who had even begun this process a few years ago never blogged. Some of them hadn't created podcasts. They just listened to them. But the technology skills were not a big deal. scaffolding the learning, thinking about how they collaborated, deciding if something was a credible site. That was the big deal. Gaming course that we're doing at the high school, that we put in place last year at our high school, same idea. There were a lot of tools embedded to be able to do the work, but it was a lot. It was logic. It was a pretty basic course, but it was a lot of systems thinking and creating and play testing and refining. A lot of skills that students would presumably use in other courses, or you know, as they enter the workforce or higher ed or whatever that might be. So things like that were, again, there was a method, there was content, there was scaffolding, there was expectations, and the teacher certainly taught and then did a lot of guiding, and there was a lot of group work. In the beginning, it's quite a bit to manage, but I think teachers bought into it. They saw the kids learning and producing quite a bit, and the kids loved it. So I mean, those are just a couple of practices I can think of that were really effective. And what we didn't do is add on. I have to say the gaming course was a half-credit course, so that was certainly an add to the curriculum. But for the most part, a lot of the tools are not now we'll go how to learn how to use this in isolation, or you might want to. And the other thing that I would say is not effective is just giving students a choice of, this is what I'd like you to do and think about, and create something and deliver it to me any way you'd like. Kids seem really confused by that. They actually want that direction.
Yeah, I'm going to have to reiterate what Danny says. For me, it was about providing choice. And I always start with a question that you take from the design-based research is, what I'm planning to do, does that enhance or inhibit my pedagogical goal? And that's how I basically try to guide my decision. That question really guides my curricular design when I'm working with sixth graders or if I'm working with graduate students. And I'm fearful because I find that there's a lot of pushback against choice in schools. We're talking about having a shared text all the time. We're talking about that there has to be the core curriculum, the core content knowledge that every student must have. And I'm fearful that those courses are becoming louder and louder. But so what I try to do instead is I try to have that kind of core content or that core text, and then allow the choice to sort of build off of that through the students picking their own topics, especially in reading, or building genres. Now, that being said, when I provide student choice and I allow students to vote on topics, I am a pretty good K Street lobbyist in guiding how those choices are made. So I agree with Danny in that sense too, that it isn't just a free-for-all, like, oh, your goal is to do something using somewhere and make sure that it goes to somebody. I do like kind of having a structure, but that may not, that's also my personality. So that's kind of how I look at it, is just through that lens of always asking yourself, by using this thing, am I enhancing my pedagogical goal or am I inhibiting my pedagogical goal?
Let me just say a word on that also, and a little different, from a little different direction. A while back, I was working in a school and on a task force within the school, and we were concerned about how to make changes and what we needed to do to move forward. And one of the things that was put on the table by one of the people on this task force, which involved citizens, teachers, and the superintendent. It was a relatively small task force, but was really quite representative. One of the things put on the table was to develop a learner program for each student. So they're gonna have their own learning plan. Learner plan. Geez, why is that so hard to say? Their own learner plan. So we were talking about it, and I said, we were going through and describing what it was, and I said, I'd like to make one change in this. We said that, the goal is to develop a learner plan for each student. I would like to make the change and take out student, put in child. And it was interesting because we're a really good superintendent. The superintendent, got it right away, what we were saying, in terms of recognizing that was not just a little word shift, but it was really a shift in focus. What we're going to do is look at the child as a learner in that more holistic, comprehensive way, and that would be available. We're talking about putting it on having it accessible to parents and teachers, so that you get a profile of this kid in terms of his or her movement through the school from kindergarten to senior. And that would mean then that that teachers would be privy to this, and it would include the kinds of learning, the kinds of capabilities and interests which were being nurtured outside school as well as in school in a comprehensive way, so that so that at least teachers who were disposed and who recognize this provides them with an opportunity to to know where that student is, could take advantage of it, and it would be seen in a composite way. Well, sad to say, we weren't able to. We had good support for it in the task force for a variety of reasons, not useful to go into here. We weren't able to pull it off. But I think something along those lines, where we shift the focus in terms of the kid, and where we where the things that they are doing, and we also have to do, if you talk to a lot of people about World of Warcraft, they or some of the games that we do, they think they don't really understand what some of this is, and how in some ways it can be very useful in terms of the kids learning. So we have to hold back a little bit on our value judgments on some of this stuff, and recognize that learning is learning, and we ought to be recognizing that, and not segregating it, because fundamentally, as far as I can tell, the kid sitting in my classroom, there's only one kid. There's not one kid that comes to school and one kid that goes home. It's the same kid. And so it starts from that very simplistic recognition that that's our function. And I think, I'd love to see some school district or somewhere that would give some exploration of that idea of providing that kind of a program, to see how it can be an enhancement and inducement for us to think about the child and learning in a different way than we're currently thinking of him or her.
And Jim, I think that also speaks to schools of education, pre-service teacher programs. And I mean, so universities really have a chance, I think, to lead some of this, and to start maybe inculcating the idea that we need to look at critical use of media and learner impact, those two ideas, versus offering what a lot of universities offer, which are essentially trainings or separate courses, or the expectation is that it isn't touched. Technology, digital media and learning isn't really thought about in the context of disciplines, but often very much removed from it. And I hear a lot of complaints from K-12 teachers, and I don't know if complaints is the right word, more or less wondering, if this is so important, how come they didn't experience it, or even when they go back to school, or if they're in a master's program, where's all of the research to practice with digital media and learning across disciplines? So I think K-12 has a lot to learn from higher ed, and higher ed has a lot to learn from K-12, but until they kind of work together, it's almost like the students sitting in our classrooms who are experiencing, when they're interested, all sorts of time with media, and maybe not connecting it to learning, but they're doing all kinds of things, and then they don't touch technology during their so-called learning day in the bricks and mortar sense. And then you have teachers who are teaching, and they've not really touched technology in their teacher ed programs, but there's some kind of push to get on board with something in schools. So I think that connection has to be deepened.
Well, I'm glad we have another hour for this presentation, so I'll be able to really say everything I want to say in response to what you said. But oh, wait a minute, I just saw it ends at, oh geez, I thought we had another hour, darn it. But let me say quick, give you the Reader's Digest on that. I totally agree with you, and I think pre-service teacher education has done generally a very, very poor job. And by the way, when we think about pre-service, and you alluded to this, we think about pre-service, most most education programs involve a college of education, but oftentimes they involve the liberal arts colleges and others where the content courses. I mean, if you're doing a major in teaching history, well, you're going to take courses in the history department. So it's not just a college of education problem; it's a university problem in terms of the preparation. Colleges of education generally don't prepare teachers. Universities prepare teachers. I'm not trying to shift the blame off College of Education, because God knows we deserve it. But I think that's a really, really important issue. What I hear from, as I've talked about this and shut my mouth off in various places with my university colleagues, the thing that comes back to us is, yeah, Jim, but we need to provide, what you're talking about is all wonderful, but that's in the future. We need to provide, most schools aren't doing that, whatever. We need to prepare teachers for the schools that are, and that's not happening. Number one, generally, the public schools are ahead of the colleges of education, I think. So, I mean, it's a matter not of being ahead of them, but of catching up with the ones that are doing the best job. I mean, we should be preparing teachers who can function not just in the worst of our schools, but in the best of our schools. And so, as I said, this is a topic which is of great concern to me, and I'm really glad you raised it, because it is a terribly, terribly critical dimension to this whole issue. It's hard for me to stop it. I just did.
And of course, I have this grand idea that we all create this huge culture where people participate very much like what Jenkins writes and his team writes prolifically about, where people feel that their contributions really do matter, and that there's discussion about what this means, and that discussion carries through, again, from K-12 to higher ed and so on, and within the college and the entire university. And it's hard for me to understand how things can possibly change if there isn't that culture and that support in place where we don't really, I guess, where we do really take a look at the culture and social implications of using media for educating inside and outside of school. And I mean, that's a huge issue to even tackle. But again, I look at the very traditional method of schooling at not just K-12, but in higher ed, and this focus on hanging on to that tradition when the rest of the real world really isn't functioning very traditionally anymore. I mean, I think that's an issue, and culture obviously means a lot, but I think there's a huge chasm between culture online and culture within institutions, and those two are really, in my opinion, rubbing up, hitting against each other. And just the idea that we offer, we have faculty in instructional technology, to me speaks volumes about what it is we're trying to do, prepare people instructionally, not really think about the learning piece. So anyway, I know that's...
I think in many ways, though, this is one issue where the market might take care of it. Because I think if you look at the enrollment of schools that offer more hybrid programs where the technology isn't, you don't take an ed tech class, but it's across the board in their curriculum, they get to pull from graduate students across the country versus locally, and students want to go to those programs. But I agree. I was shocked at the level of technological awareness at every university I've worked at, but I think in one way, market forces hopefully will help sort that out.
But one of the things I do want to add is the fact that I'm working in this area, and the reason I'm still doing what I'm doing is not because I like to be on a losing team, and not because I'm a masochist and love to torture myself, but it's because I have had, and I'm having, the opportunity to work with people in the schools who are on the front lines, who understand this as well as I do or better, and who are working to make the changes. And changes are happening. I mean, it is occurring. So it's not occurring in as many places as I would like to see it. It's not as occurring as quickly as I would like to see it, and the people who are doing it would say that, you know. But it is as Danny has said, it represents a very, very difficult cultural shift, but people are making progress. And so the fact that you can see that it's happening somewhere in various places, and not just one or two school districts, or more than that, gives reason to believe that it can happen more. Do I think it will ever? I think if we were having this conversation 10 years from now, we'd be saying there's schools that are going to be right where they are right now. I don't think schools as an entity, the American public school system as an entity, all of us, because it isn't an entity. It's a collection of districts, and the progress that's going to be made is going to be very, very, very different. It's not going to be uniform. I don't think it is that way now, and I don't think it will be that way. I don't think if we come back and look at where we are 10 years from now, 3 years, 5 years from now, that we'll say all of a sudden, you know, it's that, you know, it's been transformed. But it is happening, and there are people who, smart people, committed people, who, despite the fact that they don't, you know, these are tough times for schools budget-wise and everywhere, they are making progress. And that's why I do this instead of spend my time playing golf, which I don't play anyway. But
well, we've got a few more minutes here. Does anybody want to make some last statements about this? I'll start out with that by saying that I see collision, institutional mindset collisions. So 8 years ago, when I started teaching online in universities, I was surprised at how few teachers were taking advantage of the media that were available. And when I asked around, I found that not all schools, but many of the schools, certainly the big name schools, are primarily knowledge factories. That's where you invent, you know, genetic engineering or a new kind of search engine, and the faculty are there to teach, but they're chosen because of their research. Mm-hmm. And we really didn't see any movement at all until we began seeing these massive online courses suddenly challenging the role of these very expensive institutions and doing, you know what, I don't think you need to pay that much money to go somewhere to learn how to do partial differential equations. That, I think, is the great advantage of Khan Academy. Now, whether you're going to understand them or not, I think, is another issue, and maybe the kind of knowledge factory instructor who's there to just kind of transfer how to is going to be challenged by that. The institution's going to be challenged by that. And at the K-12 level, all of the media that we are talking about requires some thinking for yourself and some critical thinking and some questioning authority and some ability to make independent inquiry, and that's a problem. Illich, let's bring him back at the end of the discussion. We started with him. He would say that schools are about teaching obedience to the current system. You sit in chairs in a row until the bell rings and you listen to the teacher, and a lot of parents like it that way, and they are upset when their kids start coming home and questioning them. So in both K-12 and the university, I see there's a fundamental institutional conflict, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's part of the equation.
Howard, parents and politicians. That's for the most part, if you listen to what politicians are saying, you can put them right into to that. And by the way, if anybody, you know, I think if as far as follow up to this, if you haven't read Deschooling Society, read it. It's a fascinating book, and I think it's more fascinating now in 2012 than it was in 1971. But you know, I think anybody who's part of this conversation would really enjoy reading it.